Investigators documented the GPS coordinates on Tuesday. The pre-arrest investigations into 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie in Tucson and Lynette Hooker in the Bahamas now involve the Pima County Sheriff's Department, the FBI, and the U.S. Coast Guard. Court filings confirm this matters because the extracted Google metadata reveals a coordinated procedural response across multiple agencies. But the location data extracted from the vessel Soulmate? Forensic reports established it pointed to a quadrant the U.S. Coast Guard had not initially searched, raising questions about the entire sequence of events. What the mainstream narrative suggests is an isolated tragedy, but the documented evidence reveals an entirely different timeline. If you want every case development as it happens, follow this channel, because this story continues. 84-year-old Nancy Guthrie was documented missing from her Tucson residence on February 1st. Since that date, the investigative framework has relied on a tense alliance between local and federal authorities. The family formally established a reward of up to $1 million for actionable intelligence leading to a recovery. Unverified reports suggested that the family, specifically Savannah Guthrie, had spent $500,000 on private investigators to parallel the official search. Investigators confirmed that this assertion is entirely false. Savannah Guthrie did not hire private investigators. The inquiry remains strictly under the jurisdiction of the Pima County Sheriff's Department and the FBI. The reliance on established law enforcement agencies underscores the complexity of securing verifiable evidence. Publicly, the family has maintained a schedule, with Savannah Guthrie continuing her professional obligations on the Today Show while posting appeals on social media for public assistance. But the evidence everyone was focused on, it wasn't the real problem. The timeline issue? It pointed to a 96-hour window they had all missed. According to the operational summaries, federal investigators were not granted access to the primary location for 4 days. Former FBI official Patel stated to NewsNation that the FBI offered operational assistance from day one, noting the presence of 150 agents and analysts stationed at the Tucson office. The Pima County Sheriff's Department maintained that an FBI agent assigned to their local fugitive task force was present within the first 48 hours. However, procedural protocols indicate a severe operational difference. A task force member operates in a different capacity than a fully deployed evidence response team. When an evidence response team is mobilized, specialists arrive prepared to execute a coordinated structural sweep. They establish a separate walkway, perhaps bypassing a circular driveway, to enter through a side pony wall or a secondary slider doorway to prevent contamination of the primary access points. Why delay the deployment of specialized forensic units during the critical initial window? That decision shifted the entire trajectory. As the weeks progressed, the tension extended beyond the investigative perimeter. Pima County Sheriff Chris Nanos announced a public crackdown on unlawful behavior in the neighborhoods surrounding the residence. Dispatch records recorded that 911 calls from the area had tripled. Law enforcement officials confirmed that citations carrying fines were issued to individuals described as independent media personnel. When the behavior continued, the procedural response escalated to the threat of formal arrest and jail time for habitual offenders. The physical search protocol faced equal friction. Touch DNA evidence was collected and dispatched to multiple testing facilities, including the FBI laboratory in Quantico and private laboratories in Florida specializing in advanced extraction techniques. The objective of dividing the forensic workload is interoperability, bouncing the collected genetic profiles against national databases. Further complicating the procedural narrative was the documented presence of high-level federal leadership. Incident logs confirm that the FBI director personally visited the Tucson field office during the initial phases of the investigation. In standard criminal matters, field operations are managed by local command structures. The physical presence of the director is a statistical anomaly, usually reserved for mass casualty events or federal crises. The deployment of federal resources at that scale indicated that the intelligence being gathered behind the scenes far exceeded what was being released to the public. The scene in Tucson was intensely guarded. But 1,000 miles away, another maritime perimeter was raising entirely different questions. Lynette Hooker was documented missing in the Bahamas after residing on a sailboat named Soulmate. The individual who had been on the vessel with her, the registered owner of the dinghy, was detained by authorities in the Bahamas. For 5 days, he remained in custody before the legal holding limit required his release. Then, the U.S. Coast Guard analyzed the GPS data from his electronic devices. Do you think the GPS data recovered from the devices contradicts the timeline entirely, or does it confirm what the U.S. Coast Guard suspected from the beginning? Court filings confirm that digital forensics units routinely extract location coordinates that individuals believe have been permanently deleted. The maritime environment presents a highly volatile forensic landscape. The vessel Soulmate was secured at the Coast Guard station in Fort Pierce before being transferred to the Coast Guard station in Fort Lauderdale. Establishing a secure chain of custody over international waters requires rigorous documentation. Crime scene tapes surrounded the vessel as evidence technicians processed the exterior. But saltwater degrades biological material rapidly, and more than a month had elapsed since the initial disappearance. The processing of the vessel targets specific touch DNA and blood residue. Inside the cabin, forensic technicians analyze spatial division. A lamp or a headboard can yield fingerprints that establish exactly who occupied which side of the space. If bloodstains are located on one side, the cast-off patterns provide a geometric map of the event. The U.S. Coast Guard also impounded the smaller dinghy. The individual detained in the Bahamas claimed that Lynette Hooker had bounced off the vessel during turbulent weather. However, the GPS data mapped a route that diverged significantly from that narrative. If the digital tracking established that the dinghy traveled from point A to point C, bypassing point B entirely, the search grid must expand to account for those coordinates. Furthermore, forensic specialists analyzed the interior of the dinghy for secondary impact evidence. A primary impact may not generate significant cast-off, but a secondary contact with the wet surface of the hull would leave measurable satellite blood patterns. Friends and associates of the individual last seen with Lynette Hooker have publicly expressed concern that he may attempt to leave the jurisdiction. Surveillance and tripwires can monitor international movement, but formal charges require a standard of evidence that is exceptionally difficult to meet without a body. Without a physical victim, the defense can introduce plausible deniability regarding the timeline, the GPS coordinates, and the consumption of alcohol prior to the disappearance. The cross-border nature of the investigation necessitates advanced interoperability. Federal agents assigned to international embassies frequently interface with local entities to track financial movements and secure physical assets. The Bahamian authorities' decision to hold the primary individual for the maximum allowable limit of 5 days provided the U.S. Coast Guard with the operational window required to secure the dinghy and initiate the secondary GPS analysis. The maritime data provided one set of answers, but back in Arizona, a single piece of encrypted technology was about to break the silence. The Nancy Guthrie investigation appeared to be collapsing under the weight of degraded physical evidence and interagency disputes. The family had informed first responders that they possessed no access to the exterior cameras, which were ostensibly installed for monitoring local wildlife. But the property was also equipped with a Google Nest doorbell camera, The surveillance unit appeared entirely inaccessible because there was no paid subscription service attached to the account. Local authorities lack the immediate digital infrastructure to bypass the encryption. Then the FBI approached Google directly. What the data extraction retrieved from that encrypted metadata? The metadata provided visual confirmation of the exterior porch. The imagery documented an individual approaching the residence. The evidence established that the suspect arrived prepared, carrying what was described in operational terms as a kill kit containing a tarp. The forensic analysis documented blood evidence on the porch that was mathematically inconsistent with a minor medical event or an accidental fall. The scale of the biological material confirmed that a severe event had occurred. During the initial pre-arrest investigation, 2 separate individuals were detained. Search warrants were executed. Their residences were systematically processed, and aerial support was deployed. Both individuals were subsequently released, and legal representatives asserted they had zero involvement in the disappearance of Nancy Guthrie. Why execute high-profile warrants if the probable cause was not absolute? The execution of search warrants requires strict judicial authorization. A judge must evaluate the probable cause before signing the order. The system demands that law enforcement errs on the side of extreme caution when assembling a complex case. Arresting the wrong individual severely compromises the integrity of any future trial. The ongoing delay is a function of this cautious procedural approach. If charges are filed at the procedural review scheduled for June 16th, the primary suspect's identity will finally become public record. The reliance on advanced metadata to override jurisdictional delays is a recurring pattern. This is the 3rd multi-jurisdictional missing persons case in the region in the last 12 months, where digital forensics superseded physical collection. The reality of these investigations is that law enforcement operates in a fractured environment, forced to reconstruct complex events from degrading physical traces, compromised maritime vessels, and locked digital vaults. The standard of evidence requires more than suspicion. It requires an unbroken chain of verified facts. If this case matters to you, the next development is one you will not want to miss. Whether the U.S. Coast Guard found conclusive biological evidence on the impounded vessel Soulmate, and what that means for international jurisdiction, is a question the court filings have not yet answered.